The staff at one of the most fashionable cocktail bars in New York spent the better part of an hour making a quiet man at the end of the bar the punchline of the night. Not because he'd done anything, not because he was rude or drunk or in anyone's way, because he was plainly dressed and reserved and had ordered something simple in a temple of $40 cocktails, and the head bartender decided that a man like that was there to be laughed at. So they laughed at him, to his face and just past it. The bartender did bits about him for the regulars. The regulars played along. And the reserved man sat there and took it and answered their cruelty with a quiet politeness that only seemed to make it funnier to them. They had no idea who he was. They had no idea what kind of night he was having, or where he'd come from an hour before he walked through their door. They found out. And when the staff of that bar found out exactly who they'd spent an hour mocking, and worse, what he'd been carrying while they did it, a fashionable room full of very cool people went so silent you could hear the ice settle in the glasses. Here's the strange part, though. The thing that happened next was not the thing they deserved, and it was not the thing you're expecting, and it is the reason I've never been able to stop telling this story. There is a bar in the West Village called Larkspur, and if you have to ask where it is, you are, by the bar's own careful design, not meant to find it. No sign, an unmarked door beside a flower shop, a narrow staircase, and then a low golden room that has been, for about a decade, one of the places in Manhattan where a certain kind of person goes to feel like one of the anointed. The cocktails cost $26 and come with a small speech. The bartenders are famous, in the way bartenders can be famous now. The lighting is engineered to make everyone look like they're in on something. It is a room built on a subtle, constant sorting, who belongs to the scene and who has merely wandered into it, and everyone inside can feel which side of that line they're on at every moment. That sorting is the whole product. It is the thing that $26 actually buys. Into that room on a cold Tuesday night, a little before 11, a reserved man in a plain dark jacket came down the narrow stairs, took the last stool at the far end of the bar, and asked quietly for a whiskey. Neat, no speech necessary. His name was Marcus Rourke. If you had watched movies in the last 20 years, you knew the face. The quiet one, the reluctant hero, the man who did the hard right thing at the worst possible cost to himself. But the light at Larkspur was low and golden and unhelpful, and the man had his collar up and a look on his face that did not invite a second glance, and nobody clocked him, which was the only thing in the world he wanted right then. Because, an hour earlier, Marcus Rourke had been sitting in a hospital room on the East Side, holding the hand of a dying man named Sol Auerbach, the acting teacher who, 40 years ago, had seen something in a broke, furious foster kid that the kid could not see in himself, and had refused to let him quit, and had, more than any other single person, made Marcus's whole life possible. Sol was 91 now, and he was going, and Marcus had sat with him until the old man drifted off, and then he had walked out into the cold and not been able to face the empty hotel room, and had ducked down the first quiet-looking staircase he passed, because he did not want to be Marcus Rourke tonight, and he did not want to be alone. He wanted one whiskey, in a warm room, near some strangers, to sit with the fact that the man who saved him was dying. That was all. That was the entire reason he was at Larkspur. He had walked into the wrong bar for it. The head bartender's name was Silas Vance, and to understand what he did that night, you have to understand that he was not, at his core, a cruel man. He was a grieving one, though he'd have laughed in your face if you'd said so, because the thing Silas was grieving had died so slowly, over so many years, that he'd stopped being able to see it as a death at all. Silas was 39, and he was the king of Larkspur, And 15 years ago, he had been going to be something else entirely. He had been a musician, a real one, a songwriter with a band that mattered, in the small, hot world where such things are measured. And for about 18 months in his early 20s, Silas Vance had been on the actual edge of the actual dream. There had been a label interested. There had been a showcase that people flew in for. There had been a night he would tell you if he ever told anyone, which he didn't, when he stood on a stage on the Lower East Side and felt the whole rest of his life open up in front of him like a door. And then it hadn't happened. The way it usually doesn't. The label passed. The bassist quit. The moment, which is always shorter than you think, closed. The band limped on for 2 more years and then dissolved without ceremony, and Silas, who had never planned for a world in which it didn't work, found himself 27 and tending bar to pay rent, telling himself it was temporary. It was not temporary. 15 years later, he was still behind a bar, and he had made a kind of peace with it, except that the peace was a lie, and underneath the lie was a grief he could not afford to look at. Because to look at it directly would be to admit that the best version of his life had gotten away from him while he was busy being young and certain, and that the door he'd felt open on that stage had closed for good, and he'd been standing in front of it ever since, pretending he didn't hear it lock. So Silas built armor out of contempt. He became the coolest man in every room he stood in, because being cool is a way of standing above the thing you're afraid you failed at. He was cutting and quick, and the regulars loved him for it. And he had spent a decade sorting the world into the people who were in on it and the sad squares who weren't. Because as long as there was a square to look down on, Silas didn't have to notice that he was the saddest man in his own bar. And when a plainly dressed, reserved, quiet man took the last stool and ordered a whiskey neat with none of the reverence the room ran on, Silas Vance saw the perfect square. A guy with no scene, no shine, no idea where he was. A guy who looked, in fact, like a man who'd given up on being anybody. Everything Silas was terrified of being. And Silas did what he always did with his own fear. He turned it into a joke and pointed it at somebody else. Whiskey neat, Silas announced to the regulars clustered at his end of the bar, loud enough to carry. A man of bold and daring vision. Let me guess, you saw the flower shop and figured there was a TV in here somewhere? The regulars laughed. And it began. It went on for the better part of an hour, and it got worse the way these things do, because cruelty needs feeding, and an audience is an appetite. Silas did bits. He narrated the reserved man's drink like a nature documentary. He asked, with elaborate concern, whether the gentleman needed directions to a sports bar, whether the whiskey was too complex, whether he was lost, spiritually or geographically. The regulars, 3 or 4 of them, the orbiting court every bar king has, chimed in, emboldened. Someone did an impression of the man's quietness. Someone else stage whispered a guess about what he did for a living, something menial, and it got a laugh. And the reserved man took it. He didn't leave. He didn't snap. He sat with his whiskey and absorbed an hour of a room deciding he was nothing. And when Silas lobbed a jab directly at him, "You always this quiet, Chief? Or are we boring you?" The man looked up, and instead of the anger everyone was half hoping to provoke, he said, simply and without heat, "Long day." Didn't mean to be poor company, and he almost smiled, and it was a tired, real, human thing, and for just a second it made the joke feel like what it was, which was cruelty, and Silas felt that, and hated feeling it, and so he pushed harder to bury it. Down the bar, a 23-year-old barback named Nadia was watching all of it and hating every second, and saying nothing, because she was new, and she needed the job. And Silas Vance was the most powerful person in her small working world. Nadia had come to New York 2 years earlier to be a songwriter. She kept a notebook in her bag right now, tonight, full of songs no one had heard. She worked the bar to survive, and she idolized Silas a little and feared him a lot. And she had already begun, without quite noticing, to talk about her own music the way Silas talked about his, with a protective little sneer, a getting there before anyone could laugh at her. She was, though she could not see it, standing at the exact trailhead of the exact road that had turned Silas Vance into the man now mocking a stranger for sport. And some part of her, watching the reserved man take it with that tired grace, felt sick in a way she couldn't name. She was the one who recognized him first. She'd been clearing a glass near his end of the bar, close enough finally to really see his face under the raised collar, and she froze and her eyes went wide, and she looked from the reserved man to Silas mid-bit and back, and the blood drained out of her face. Because Nadia went to the movies, and Nadia knew exactly who had been sitting at the end of their bar, taking an hour of abuse. She didn't announce it. She couldn't. Her voice wouldn't work. But a bar is a small ecosystem, and a barback-stricken face is a loud thing, and within a minute a regular had followed her stare and half risen off his stool and said, "Too loud. Wait." Holy. That's Marcus Rourke. The name went through the golden room like a dropped tray. Everything stopped. The laughter Silas had been conducting died in the regulars' throats. Heads turned. Phones came halfway up and then, mercifully, didn't. And Silas Vance stood behind his own bar with a bar rag in his hand and looked. Really looked. At the reserve square he'd spent an hour dismantling, and saw the face he'd somehow missed under the collar and the tired eyes, and felt the whole floor of the night tilt. He had spent an hour mocking one of the most beloved men in the country, and though he didn't know this part yet, he had done it to a man who'd come straight from a deathbed to sit quietly in a warm room, because it was the only thing he could think to do with his grief. And here is where the title of this story usually delivers on its promise. Here is where the comeuppance lands. Because the owner of Larkspur, a sharp image-obsessed woman named Delia, who had been at the other end of the bar and had watched the color drain out of her room, crossed the floor fast, her face white with the specific horror of a business owner watching her brand die in real time. She reached Silas, and she did not lower her voice, and she said the thing the whole night had been building toward. "Get your things. You're done. Right now. You just did that. That to Marcus Rourke in my bar, and I watched you do it for an hour, and you are finished here tonight, and I'll be calling the others in too." She was already turning to Nadia, to the regulars, to the server who'd laughed loudest. "All of you. This is. Please don't." It was the reserved man. It was Marcus. He'd stood up from his stool, and his voice was quiet, and it stopped Delia cold. "Please," Marcus said again, gently, into the silent room. "Don't fire anybody. Not on my account. Not tonight." He looked at Silas, not with triumph, not with anger, but with something that was almost recognition. The way you look at a man whose particular kind of hurt you happen to know by heart. "Nobody here is losing their job over me." He turned back to Delia. "But I'd like to talk to him. Just for a minute. Somewhere quiet, if there is such a place in here." He almost smiled again, that same tired thing. "And then I'll get out of everyone's night." There was a small office at the top of a back stair, and Marcus and Silas went up to it. And Silas sat down like a man waiting to be sentenced, because he was certain, of course he was, that the graciousness downstairs had been for the audience, and that up here, in private, the man was going to finally let him have it. Marcus sat down across from him, and the first thing he said undid every defense Silas had left. "I'm not up here to yell at you," Marcus said. "I promise. I don't have it in me tonight." He rubbed his face. "A man doesn't work that hard to make a stranger feel small unless he feels pretty small himself, somewhere he doesn't look. That was a lot of energy you spent on me down there. That's not the energy of a happy man. So what happened, Silas? Where'd it go?" And Silas Vance, who had not said the true thing out loud to another living person in 15 years, said it to the man he'd spent an hour humiliating. He told him about the band, about the showcase people flew in for, about the night on the Lower East Side when the whole rest of his life opened up like a door, and about the label passing, and the bassist quitting, and the slow, unglamorous death of the only thing he'd ever wanted, and the 15 years since of standing behind a bar being the coolest man in the room because cool was the only thing left that felt like winning. "And you walked in," Silas said, his voice cracking, quiet, plain, no scene, looking like a guy who'd made his peace with being nobody, and I couldn't stand it. Because that's my nightmare. That's the thing I see in the mirror at 4 in the morning. So I did what I always do. I made it about somebody else being the failure, so I wouldn't have to be. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. And it was you. A guy who actually made it. I mocked a guy who did the thing I couldn't for being humble about it. God, I'm the joke. I've been the joke for 15 years. Marcus didn't interrupt. He let it land. Then he told Silas something true, and it was not what Silas expected. "You think I had it easy," Marcus said quietly. "You think I'm the guy the door opened for. Let me tell you where I was tonight, an hour before I walked into your bar." He paused. "I was at a hospital, holding the hand of a 91-year-old man named Soul, who is dying and who is the only reason I'm not exactly where you are right now. Because I failed, Silas, for years. I was broke. I was nobody. I got told no so many times I lost count. And I had a night, more than one, where I decided to quit and go home and stop embarrassing myself. And an old man refused to let me. He saw something, and he would not let me put it down." His voice thickened. "The only difference between you and me is not talent, and it's not luck, though luck's part of it. It's that somebody stood in front of my door when it was trying to close, and wouldn't let it. That's it. That's the whole difference. And I've spent 40 years knowing it." Then he asked the question he'd come up the stairs to ask. That kid down there. Nadia, the barback. Marcus held his eyes. "She's got a notebook in her bag right now, doesn't she? She came here to make something. And she's been watching you for 2 years, learning how to talk about her own dream the way you talk about yours, with a sneer, so nobody can laugh at her first." He leaned in. "You're about to do to her what nobody did to me. You're teaching a young person how to give up with style. Is that who you want to be to her? The guy who taught her that contempt is safer than trying? Or do you want to be the old man who wouldn't let the door close?" Silas Vance put his face in his hands. That was the beat. The whole thing turned on it. "I don't even know if I can still play," he whispered. "Nobody knows that until they pick it back up," Marcus said, standing. "But I know exactly what happens if you don't. You've been living it for 15 years. I'm not asking you to get the band back or chase the label. I'm asking you to stop being the guy who makes fun of the quiet ones because he's scared of his own silence. Go home tonight and find whatever you wrote your songs in. And tomorrow, be someone that kid downstairs can afford to learn from. He put a hand on the man's shoulder. It's not too late. It's almost never as late as we tell ourselves. That's the lie the door tells you so you'll stop knocking. They came back down the stairs, and the golden room went quiet again, braced for whatever came next. And Silas Vance walked out from behind his own bar and crossed to the far stool, and in front of the regulars he'd performed for all night, he said to Marcus, "I owe you an apology, and I'm going to say it out loud, so it costs me something. I spent an hour tonight trying to make you small, because I couldn't stand how small I felt for 15 years. It was cowardly, and it was cruel, and I'm ashamed. And it would have been just as wrong if you'd been the nobody I decided you were." He swallowed. That guy deserved his whiskey in peace too. Marcus gave him the real smile, the warm one, the tired, crooked one. "That's all I needed to hear," he said. Then he found Nadia, who was crying and pretending not to, and he said something to her quietly that nobody else heard, and he pressed a folded napkin into her hand with something written on it, and he left cash on the bar that made the bartender who counted it later go very still, and he went up the narrow stairs and out past the flower shop into the cold, back toward the hospital, or the empty hotel room, or wherever a grieving man goes at midnight, and he was gone before the room had finished understanding what had happened in it. He was always gone before the credit arrived. That was the thing about Marcus. Here's the part the story usually skips. The slow part. The true part. It did not fix Silas Vance overnight. 15 years of armor doesn't come off in one night. But some things had started to move that couldn't be stopped. He went home, and he found the notebooks, 3 of them, in a box in a closet he'd been not opening for a decade, and he sat on his floor and read 15-year-old songs by a kid who believed the door was open, and he cried. And then, near dawn, he picked up a guitar he'd kept but not played, and his fingers remembered more than he'd have bet they would. He didn't quit the bar. Rent is rent. But he became a different man behind it. He stopped sorting the room into the anointed and the squares. He started, of all things, hosting a quiet Sunday night thing at Larkspur. No cover, no scene. Just anybody who made anything getting 15 minutes and a real audience. And it became, in its small way, the most beloved night the bar had. He played his own songs at it, eventually, badly. At first. Then not badly. He was never going to be 24 on that Lower East Side stage again. And he made his peace with that. And it turned out peace was different from the thing he'd been calling peace for 15 years. The real kind doesn't require a square to look down on. Nadia was the reason for the Sunday nights, though the regulars didn't know it. Because the napkin Marcus had pressed into her hand had a name and a number on it. A producer. A real one. A friend of Soul's, with a note that said only she has a notebook. Give her 10 minutes. And Nadia used it, and it led where those things sometimes actually lead, and 3 years later she put out a record. There's a song on it, called The Man at the End of the Bar, and it is about the night she watched a stranger take an hour of cruelty with a tired grace, and then quietly, on his way out the door, hand a scared kid the rest of her life. She never used his name in it. She didn't have to. Silas produced 2 tracks on that record. Nadia insisted. She said he was the one who taught her how to be around music without letting the fear of it turn her mean. Which was true, in the end, though it took him nearly ruining a stranger's night to learn it himself. Sol Auerbach died that week, peacefully, and Marcus was with him. At the memorial, Marcus said that the only thing he'd ever really done with his life was try to be, for other people, the man's soul had been for him, the one who won't let the door close. He didn't mention a bar in the West Village. But somewhere in the city that night, a bartender who'd found his notebooks was, without knowing it, proof that Marcus had done exactly that. One more time, for one more person who'd started the evening not deserving it at all. Marcus was asked about the bar once, years later, when Nadia's song got big enough that people connected it to him. He looked almost uncomfortable. He wasn't a cruel guy, Marcus said. He was a guy standing in front of a door that closed on him a long time ago. Making fun of everybody still knocking. I've been that scared. I just had somebody catch me before it hardened. All I did was catch him a little late. And he changed the subject. Because he was, as ever, already gone before the credit arrived. I have told a lot of stories on this channel, but I keep coming back to this one. And the title of tonight's story promised you that mocking the reserved man at the bar is never safe, and I want to be honest with you about what I've come to think that means. Because it isn't what it sounds like. It doesn't mean the quiet man is dangerous. Marcus Rourke didn't hurt anybody. He didn't even let anybody get fired. The danger was never that the reserved man would come after you. The danger is that you never, ever know what the reserved man is carrying, or who he is, or what one cruel hour aimed at him will end up saying about you. Silas didn't know he was mocking a grieving man an hour out of a hospital. He didn't know he was mocking the exact life he'd wanted for himself. He didn't know the person he was really diminishing, in the end, was Silas. That every joke he made was one more nail in his own 15-year coffin. One more thing for the kid down the bar to learn from. Mocking a quiet stranger is never safe, because it's your own soul you're gambling. Every single time, on the assumption that the person in front of you is less than you. And you are almost always wrong about that. Almost always. So here's the question the story left me with, and I don't have a clean answer for it. Somewhere near you is a reserved person at the end of a bar, or a bus, or a waiting room, quiet, plainly dressed, easy to dismiss, and you have no idea what they walked in carrying. Would you be kind to them, on a night when being cruel would get a laugh? Or would you need to find out who they were first? Honestly, I'm not sure. Most of us aren't sure. And maybe that's the thing worth carrying out of that golden room, that the quietest person you'll meet today is carrying something you can't see, and the only truly safe thing to do with a stranger, the only thing that never once backfires, is to be gentle with them. This story is fictional, inspired by the quiet kind of decency the best people are known for, the kind that catches the man who mocked him before his own bitterness can finish the job. If it got to you, do me a favor down in the comments. Don't just say great story. Tell me about a dream you set down that you're not sure is really gone, or about the person who wouldn't let your door close. I read every one. They're the best part of this. And if you know someone standing in front of a door that closed on them a long time ago, making fun of everyone still knocking, send them this. It might be the exact thing they need to hear today. If you're new here, subscribe. There's another story coming, and I'd be glad to have you for it. See you in the next one.